My colleague Jim and I are from National Louis University, so we're going to present a little bit about how we have re-envisioned higher education and really trying to lead to economic mobility. So my name is Tracy Templin. I am an assistant professor at NLU. I do spend about half my time teaching, and the other half I spend on strategic initiatives and worked really closely over the last 7 years or so helping to build out the undergraduate college. I'm joined by Jen.
Jen Robin, nice to meet everyone, not officially, but in this setting. I currently work with an accelerated youth program within National Louis, which I'll explain a little bit in the model. Tracy and I previously were on the same leadership team for our undergraduate college, and I actually started out as a teacher for 10 years, and really it was a grade 7 through 12 setting. So really kind of bring a variety of different age background pieces to my work and love all of it. So it's a little bit about us. And so we thought we'd start one just to get people talking, and since this is the end of the day, you guys have probably had some time to think on this and similar topics on your own. But being that we're representing higher ed, we thought we would start with just everybody's perspective. If you could just kind of turn to a neighbor and think about what ways, from wherever you're at, whatever your vantage point is, where do you see higher ed falling short when it has to do with supporting students to persist and succeed and actually getting the degree. So not just getting through the threshold and starting classes, but finishing whatever that degree is. For the current program I'm on, that's a certificate program. Obviously the rest of the university, we're looking at bachelor's degree attainment. So you guys could just spend a couple minutes thinking on like where are those big gaps that you're seeing from your particular areas. Former teacher, I always hate to break up lively discussion, but we thought we could just share out a couple of these in no particular order, so feel free if you have something to share out, something that your group was talking about. Go ahead. Yeah.
So lack of support in smaller communities for students when they get to college, when they get to higher ed. The things that are put in place to get students to higher ed, especially in urban communities or students who are first-time, college goers, those things aren't replicated in higher ed. So it's one of those like, okay, you made it, drop me off here, and then that's it. There's no one to hold them accountable, no one to check in on them, support them social emotionally, check off the checklist. We were just talking about, simple things like completing the FAFSA the following year so that you continue to get, financial aid, making sure that you're, just doing those things that other students who aren't first-generation college students just know by virtue of their parents or their community or their support base having. And so when you don't have that replication of those support systems for students in higher ed, they drop out and fall by the wayside, and they say, hey, this isn't for me. So
that's great. I'm taking notes. These are great ideas, and I want to lose them.
Yeah. Something sort of similar that we talked about, but on the academia side, is there can be a lack of course navigation supports. So classic example, student says, oh, I'll take all my science requirements this semester so I can get them out of the way. And then those are all really rigorous and they fall behind and just can't keep up and so on. So having that support of here's the requirements, here's how we suggest you blend them so you have a well-rounded semester. And then that continued support.
And I guess to build off of the continued support idea, sometimes you get to a school that's kind of getting it right with their freshman year experience, or not freshman year, where they're really kind of wrapping around and cohorting the kids and everything else. But then they get to sophomore year and they're like, hey, all right, now it's time to go out there and do great things. And so finding the threads of what needs to stay with them and to help them continue to succeed, I think is really important.
So, something that's kind of comical is and I've been saying it all day about the student success thing and recruitment and getting people there. It's like churches. They are really excited to have new members. You go through your new members orientation. After you go through your new members orientation, it's like, well, wait, what happened? It's like we want you to get connected to a ministry. And whether you sign up or not, it just is what it is, right? So we get you in the door, we're excited to have you, give you training, and then we just drop it off. And so if you've been a member for 5 years, you're like, I ain't heard from nobody. You know, so that's one thing that's kind of comfortable. Number two, we talked about one of the populations that we see as a vulnerable population are commuter students.
Yes.
So students who are involved on campus, Greek life, all those, we see a higher retention rate for those students. But if we know that there's a student housing complex or an apartment building that's 20 miles from campus, the commuter student comes to school, they go to work, the majority of them go stay in this student housing that's 20 miles away from campus. Why do we say tune in virtually for tutoring? Why can't you go to that apartment complex and have a tutoring site at that apartment complex, right? And so we're just kind of brainstorming some ideas and stuff like this, and I think we said generally higher eds just don't do a good job, period, at retaining folks.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say really is oftentimes we look at then these populations that always get attention, like we say African American males are not retained at a high rate. That may be true, but no other population is either, right? So let's not just highlight this group and it's convenient for us to look at that group, but no, let's look at the other kids too, because they're not staying either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the commuter comment, we are almost all for our undergraduates, commuter-based population, so, yeah, that
Huge
super
challenge.
resonates,
Yeah.
huge challenge, and
Yeah.
yeah, really resonates. Maybe one more idea? And that's a good one? Now we can keep going. Go ahead.
So we came up with an idea. One of the things that was mentioned earlier that we talked about is oftentimes, especially what we see with freshmen, because they're so used to high school and used to having somebody tell them what to do, that they get into these spaces and it's like they don't know. Like they don't know that they need to read their syllabus and get their course calendar and keep up with the dates. You know, sometimes they think their professors are going to let them know when an assignment is due. And so one of the suggestions is maybe during those orientations, just having like a session or a course that lets them know like, hey, you have to be very self-regulated at this point. So you need to make sure you're reading your syllabus, you need to make sure you're going to your course calendar, you need to make sure you're talking to your professors, you know, knowing where the tutoring center is, where the writing center is, all of those resources that are available to them that they may not even think about, you know, that that's what I need to know, but making that available at the front end so that when it's, you know, midterms and I need help with my paper, instead of me just, you know, I'm just gonna stop or I'm not gonna do it, I can go to the writing center. I know where this place is. I remember this from my freshman orientation, that these resources are available and that I know that it is up to me to wake up in the morning. It is up to me to make sure my assignments are done, because you may have a professor that will remind you, but oftentimes they're not gonna remind you because you're supposed to know. Like that's that assumption that we know what is supposed to happen, but that's not always what happens.
Yeah, and not all, some professors do that naturally and others don't feel like that's, I know one thing we even struggle with is like, but that's not my job, that's the advisor, the coach, or someone else's role, right? Versus how do we look at it as like, it's all everybody's job, basically.
Absolutely. Yes, all of that resonates, and those are the exact same things that we also grapple with at NLU as well. So just a really quick overview of NLU and who we are. We're the oldest oldest universities in Chicago. We're private nonprofit. We serve, actually it's probably a little over 11,000 now, but serve over 10,000 students. We historically, prior to 7 or 8 years ago, had been almost entirely graduate student focus, and the University of Chicago came out with a lot of data just around college completion rates within the Chicago, specifically Chicago public schools, but in the Chicagoland area. And we at NLU, our president had a vision to say we need to address this, right? We need to really re-envision what undergraduate education can look like so that we can serve this need of students that are getting into college, but also completing college and then landing a successful outcome post-college, so a successful career. So we grew from about 85 students in 2015 for our first entering class, serving first-time freshmen, and now our undergrad is over 4,000 students, and we'll talk about those different populations, but it includes transfers from community colleges, first-time freshmen, and some certificate-seeking students as well. We are just demographically, students are majority Pell eligible. In the first-time freshman population, we're over 80%. First gen, over 80% Pell eligible. 90% of our students either identify as Black or Latinx. So our average age, first-time freshman obviously is you're going to be coming in at 18-year-old, but then our transfer students, average age is around 35 or so. As far as our the programs and what we're going to go over today is when we really think about how we can serve the Chicagoland area and our students, and really think about how can we help students achieve their personal goals and economic mobility. We've tried to address this as an institution in 3 different ways. One is our newest program, which is going to talk a little bit about, which is Accelerate U. It's about stackable credentials. So for students that are not pursuing a 4-year degree at that point, how can they pursue certification in a very high employed area that they could then apply to a 4-year degree down the road if they want to. Pathways at NLU is our program for first-time freshmen, really trying to drive again equity and bachelor's degree attainment and career sustainable employment. And then Direct to Success is our program that's really trying to reduce the barriers for students transitioning from community colleges. A lot of students go to community college intending to do a 4-year degree, but there are a lot of barriers in their way for actually, again, transitioning to and then successfully completing that bachelor's degree.
So just show you a couple pictures. I always like to apply, these are not stock photos, these are our real students. And so Hyro was actually, when I first came from the K-12 setting into higher ed, I was a success coach, and Hyro was from one of our first 85 grads, so holds a special place for me. He pursued his degree and is currently in law school, also working in real estate, so it was a great example of someone who kind of came to us as an 18-year-old, didn't really know exactly what direction he wanted to take, but thought that college was his next path, and that's kind of the journey that he went on while with us. Zuriel, she was our education major. She was a direct transfer from one of our community college partners. We partner with about, it's about 27 to 30. I switched over to the Accelerate U team, so it was around 27 when I left, and I believe it's still around 30 community colleges in the Illinois area, most specifically around the Chicago area. And she is also working full-time, also a parent, so dealing with that challenge, which is pretty common for all of our populations. And then Isha is actually somebody who I work with, almost weekly at this point. She is an alumni from our Accelerate U medical assistant program. She actually already was working in a medical related type of job, but wanted some credentialing and wanted to upskill and get into a higher salary band and have more exposure at Lurie Children's Hospital. So she came and got the degree with us, also a parenting student. She's very busy. She's now continuing and getting her, so she's an example of someone that we want to kind of introduce them to some post-secondary education, but she is now returning and getting her bachelor's degree while she's working both for us and for the hospital. So she's very busy. I don't know how she keeps it all going, but she's amazing. When did we do them all at once?
Whatever.
Okay.
That's fine. So just really thinking about all of those ways that you guys identified that higher ed fell short. As I mentioned before, those are all questions that as we were building out our undergraduate college, we were asking ourselves, how do we reduce those barriers, right? How do we address this? And so when we really think about our first-time freshman population, we have kind of 5 main pillars or components that we really designed our structure around. And so thinking about, Courtney, how he was talking about just okay, you're not just thinking about one population, but how do you change the system for everyone, right? So that you're serving everyone in the system. So first of all was really reducing the barriers around access to a 4-year institution for students. So one of the things we wanted to do is to make sure that it was super affordable. So our tuition is around $10K a year. It is the most affordable tuition in Illinois, even more affordable than public institutions. And it's fully covered by Pell and MAP, which is Illinois' state grants. So it's one of our students that are fully eligible for that would have all of their tuition and fees covered through that. And actually, I just read these numbers last week. 78% of our students will come out, of our graduates in our last class came out without under $2,000 in debt across all of their time here at NLU. We also just like convenient schedules and broad access admission. So we don't require any ACT, SAT scores. If they have a 2.0 GPA in their high school, then they're automatically admitted to our program. Clear and well-rounded course pathways. So one of the things we talked about was students taking extra courses to their degree, right? And so we have really structured pathways. Some of the best practices around kind of those meta majors, right? So we have business and technology, we have the social behavioral sciences, and we have education. And so students have, these are the courses that you take in your general education program and in your major to complete that. So very minimal taking extra courses to complete those degrees. And then we've also kind of packaged, I'll get to career development a little bit later, but we do have required career development curriculum, and all of those we've either packaged and embedded into their gen ed, or we have created a leadership concentration. So they actually get kind of a concentration on their diploma when they graduate for their career curriculum that's required. Active, experiential, personalized classroom experience. As an educator and someone who's teaching in the classroom, I get really excited about this, especially some of the, I think the learnings that we've taken from K-12 and really trying to implement in the higher education space. So thinking about one of the things, the learning communities that we have. So as faculty, even adjunct, part-time faculty and full-time faculty meet weekly. We meet weekly for kind of two different purposes. As far as like the classroom experience, we meet weekly within our departments to talk about instructional strategies, right? So we just talk about, okay, here's what's going on, here's this the lesson plan for the next week. What are some strategies that other faculty are using to teach this, right? Historically, students have struggled on this module. Okay, what can we do to help improve those practices? How do we implement culturally responsive pedagogy? How do we better develop relationships with students? And so these are all kind of professional development topics that we grapple with when we meet together. We really try to do an active flipped classroom experience and design. And so when you think about that traditional college classroom where there's like 500 students in a lecture hall, or even a smaller class size, right, where it's typically a faculty lecturing, we try to do away with that, like minimal lecturing, more active hands-on project-based learning. And so there's a lot of PD that goes along with that. How do you actually implement this in the classroom? And then thinking about all those like wraparound supports. So students in our first-time freshman class are assigned a success coach. We think about the transition from high school to college. In the ideal world, when students are getting admitted while they're in high school over the summer in that transition period, they meet with their coach before they even step foot in the fall on the college campus. They talk about the resources that are on campus. They talk about the students' personal goals, right? What is their support? Jen created the check-in for that, so she could probably add to that. But really trying to develop that relationship with students so that they do have a go-to person that can check in with them, and that there are required check-ins with students as they go throughout their 4, 5, or 6-year career at the institution. Talking about, did you complete the FAFSA, right? Or here's some reason, let me send out an email to let them know, like, okay, here's the FAFSA workshops that are coming up. Let's talk about your course plan, your course pathway. Let's talk about those career goals. And then wraparound supports too. We do have robust wraparound supports. I would say, COVID we were able to expand that a lot. So we have a really robust counseling center, food pantry. We have a licensed clinical social worker to work with students. When we think about like tutoring or embedded support, we've identified courses that do have the highest EWF grades or the withdrawal D and failure rates, and we've embedded writing specialists into those courses. I teach a research course, so that's one of them where I partner with a writing specialist. We have individual check-ins. They get to put a face to the tutoring center or to the writing center, which is really cool. And then lastly, the career preparation. So starting from students' freshman year, we have a student success seminar where students are really learning about the institution and the resources available, and then also, for them doing a lot of reflection. We've embedded career exploration into that course as well. So they start thinking about, okay, what is my major? How do I want, what kind of careers are out there within this major? And then we've also embedded additional, like developing that LinkedIn profile, right? Your resume. What are some informational interviews with people in the field? And really trying to prepare them and get them to think about it. Students are required to do an experiential learning opportunity, an internship, and social work. That's practical, human services, field work. And so they are also assigned a career advisor as well. So they have someone, and that career advisor meets with faculty and their coach, and they talk about like, okay, has the student found an internship? If not, how do we support them? How do we get their network? Is there anyone that we can match them up or pair them up with so that they have an internship? And then hopefully that leads to employment. Similar, those career advisors also track students' employment as well, and to make sure that not only are they employed full-time, but that it's requiring a bachelor's degree, that it's at a wage that is the average wage for their field. And so really trying to, again, think about successful employment, not just graduating.
Yeah.
Just a question. This is great, and I'm thinking about the back end of this, and it's making me think about connections to employers and industry, occupations, high demand occupation. And then I started thinking about your board of directors. Is there a board of trustees?
Yes.
And who's on that? And do you have partnerships with industry groups, and do they play a role in here? And that would be great to talk about that.
Yes to all. So yeah, we do have a board of trustees. In our career bridge office where we have the career advisors, we also have employer relations managers that are going out and actually working with employers to develop those partnerships with them. So those partnerships can be about securing internships, but it also is about employment too. And so how do we make sure that we have a robust set of employer partners that can come and work with our students? And there's a variety of ways that they can do that.
And do you vet those? How do you vet those employers? Or how do you choose them or partner with them? Are there any that are sort of champions for you in that regard?
Yeah, it's gone through a lot of different iterations, and we started out with this of doing a very, they meet with the employer relations manager, we develop an MOU, and we have those conversations around how would the employer partner want to engage with the institution. So again, kind of thinking about here's all the different ways that you can engage. And so it started off with that. We've kind of gone through some different iterations. And some of the conversations that we're also having right now is that how can employers be better employers, right? And how can they, similar to how higher ed institutions can be ready for our students, not like students ready for us, right? There's also that conversation that we're just beginning to have around what do employers need to be and change in their place in order to be ready to work, and receive our students. You've worked a lot with the employer partners on APUs.
Yeah, and we'll get to that a little bit when we talk about the accelerating model. I will say it's also just been a growth for us. When we started Pathways in 2015, I think there were 2 people doing all the career development work for the entire university. And I think I sit on the same floor as that, so I'd have to count everybody's desk or office. But I feel like there's 20 people on that team now. So we've also grown a lot so that we can better do the work that you're talking about. I'm gonna you'll see, because this looks pretty similar, and that was intentional by design. After we launched our first time freshman kind of redevelopment of how do we bring students to campus in a traditional 4-year model, we realized there was still a gap with our transfer population. We specifically focused in on our students who we knew had earned associate's degrees, but either were not going beyond earning their associate degree or were facing a lot of barriers once they got to us. This was actually an initiative that I worked on for a couple of years up until October. And one of the first things we did, and I'll just be transparent, we were charging those students twice as much as our freshmen as far as a yearly rate that they were paying for a variety of reasons. So one of the things that we figured out is how can we sustain, obviously, the model of the university, but how do we offer them a very specific scholarship that acknowledges that, yes, you finished your 2-year degree at one of our partner institutions and you're coming over. So obviously implementing that scholarship was a huge part of the work that we did within this model. A lot of these other aspects are very similar to our freshman model. I will also call out two, and I think this one still probably could use continued work as well, is working with those 27 institutions, those 27 to 30 two-year institutions, and figuring out how do we make sure no credits are wasted. So if you earn an associate's degree, why are we having you take anything that's not at least a 300 level course once you get to us? So that's a constant work in progress, and Illinois probably doesn't do it the worst in the 50 states, but we're certainly not doing it the best either. So obviously that's a work in progress just statewide as well, and specifically within the Chicagoland area. And I think that's, the rest kind of goes from there. I will, I guess, just to point out from the question, or the point that was made earlier about not just helping students their first year, we have also spent time, we call it our third year experience. So if you're coming to us as a transfer student, what do we need to embed in that transition year to set you up for success? I will say, being that I was working on that, that was more challenging than with our freshman population. I think the freshmen came from a high school setting where they were used to a lot of support and connection. This is all pre-pandemic as well that I'm thinking, and we launched this program in 2020-21, so in the heat of like everybody being on Zoom anyway, so that was definitely a barrier for us, both because of everybody still being remote, and then also just managing complex lives. So if you are going to school full-time, you, at least 30% or more of this population are parenting, you're working full-time, what time do you have left for kind of like the extras? So how do we embed that in ways that are smart and that don't put the burden on the student to like go join an extra club if that's the last thing that they have time for? We want them to have that connectedness and belonging that we know is so important. The current program that I'm working at, just to round this out, and then we're going to pause and take some questions before we continue. But this is our Accelerate U model. Obviously, this one does look a little bit different. The idea behind this model is that we are bringing students in, some usually without any prior college credits, although we definitely do have students with college credits who come in as well. But the idea is that you're coming, you're spending 7 or 8 months with us, and you're earning a credential in a specific field. Our biggest one right now is medical assisting. We mostly run that out of Chicago, but we partner with an organization called Propel, so we also run that in New Jersey, Philly, Baton Rouge. I believe those are our only other cities. So that one looks a little bit different. We just launched a pilot, a very small pilot in a registered behavior technician program. Is anyone familiar with the RBT? Okay. I didn't know what it was, and I asked because I didn't know what it was until we launched it. Essentially, they are working with students with autism in their home setting. So obviously, anyone who is identified as being on the spectrum for autism is getting services within a school setting if they are of school age, but we know that's not always sufficient. So we train technicians who do home visits and give additional support within the home setting to young people as well. And then we're about to launch something in the technology field that is coming hopefully this fall, is the timing for that. The idea is that you're, just real quick on the model, most of the students, I'll focus on medical assisting since that's our biggest program right now. It's kind of what you would consider a low-res model, so they are in Zoom-based instruction 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the course, and then they are only on campus 10 times throughout their entire journey with us. And they are specifically coming those 10 times. 2 are more focused on soft skills. It's with a career coach. They're working on their resume, their team building, they're building community. But 8 of the sessions are very much focused on medical skills. So they are learning how to draw blood, how to do an EKG, how to take a blood pressure, all of the basic skills there. So that when they, as a requirement for finishing the Accelerate U program, you have to do an externship and successfully finish 160 hours in the field. And so at the very end of the program, they're in that course, so we are placing them with an employer partner We partner with a variety of different hospital, clinic conglomerates, I guess you would call them, around the Chicago area. Obviously, that is the core of our model. We really can't, because it's a requirement to finish the certificate, we can't launch a program until we have employer partners kind of signed on that are willing to take our students on the back end so they can finish the certificate program. One thing I will just call out, the things that are the most similar to our two other undergraduate models is the idea of coaching. We take that really seriously, obviously with our first-time freshman model, but also with our Accelerate U model. So the entire 7 to 8 months that they're in the program, they're assigned, okay, we're getting close to time. They're assigned to a coach, and that coach is teaching them a career-related curriculum, and then also meeting, that's in a group setting over Zoom, 2 times in person, and then they're also meeting with that coach one-on-one. We hover on this, but around once a month, sometimes twice a month, depending on the student and the situation. So we're gonna pause and just take some general questions, because I think we are very close to time. So questions about the 3 models that we're running. And we do have a slide on like barriers, but we figured we'd stop for questions first.
Just another observation, I'm just looking at low-hanging fruit around apprenticeship. What you're doing is really, those are registered apprenticeship opportunities.
Yes.
And just the way you look at some of the early work as pre-apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship, getting, the funding from labor and through that whole area. I mean, and also in the behavioral health area, which is a big one.
Yeah.
And many registered apprenticeship positions. It might be a role that you would play as a sponsor.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a huge thing is learning, is leaning into industry to know like what programs to launch and how best to support students to be successful in them is a huge part of that particular work, yeah. One thing that I will just also call out that we're currently kind of working on, and then I'll pass it back to Tracy to kind of wrap us up, but is for specifically our certificate programs and then also for our transfer programs out at our community colleges is how do you best connect and support students so that they don't feel like whatever path they're in is the end point, because it should never be the end point. So if you're starting a certificate program, what's the right amount of time once you finish successfully with us that we're calling you back up and asking, okay, are you still working in the field? Are you thinking about, do you want to come back and get a bachelor's degree? Like what do those conversations look like? And the same for our transfer student population as well. So that's kind of one of the big initiatives that we're figuring out right now.
Have you all considered looking at your student schedule as a part of supporting student success? So rather than taking sort of traditional 15 credits in a semester in like 5 different classes or whatever, looking at taking 1 or 2, but being full-time where it's more of a concentration in different areas. And if so, what's been the outcome of that? I know different universities have played with that as a way to support particularly neurodivergent students that struggle with juggling so many different things all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, we for our on ground we haven't. For our online courses, we do structure it that way so that they are registered at in 2 courses at a time, or they can register for 1 if they want it within the term. But they are at like an accelerated pace. I think that some of the things that we have to like work through around that is like the financial aid components. Because of like how many credits you register for that term kind of dictates how much aid that you receive, and especially since so many of our students are dependent on Pell and MAP funding for that, they have to use the time in order to achieve that. So that's some of the things that we've struggled with for students that we know need to at least like drop down to a reduced rate. It's always this like, but if I do, then my aid's not going to cover as much, and then I'm going to have more out-of-pocket expenses. So it's definitely one of the considerations for that. One of the things that as an institution we're thinking about is like, can we do like a 3-year bachelor degree as well.
And I think that circles back to K-12 partnerships too, because if students are exposed and available to take dual enrollment, like obviously that has an impact on what it looks like once they get to us as well. So there's definitely lots more room to partner there. And I think we're really close to time, so we can also, do you want to like wrap up and then we can open it for questions from both groups?
Yeah, sounds good. So one of the things just, in light of the conference and the stakeholder group that we have around, having K-12, nonprofits, and higher ed in the same room, really kind of thinking about, the wider community and the partnerships that can support student success. So some examples of, how that looks currently at NLU, definitely this is an area where there's so much opportunity for. One of the things that we have paid attention to do when we think about like who are our feeder schools, Chicago Public Schools is our main feeder district. We have also some districts out in the suburbs where we have satellite campuses that are feeders, but really convening with the counselors, so really tapping into CPS, Chicago Public Schools, and their network and their network of counselors to share back, okay, these are kind of the top high schools that are feeding into our to NLU, and how are those students doing, right? So being able to kind of share that high level data with them. We have dual credit models, dual enrollment models with our partners. For nonprofit partnerships, a lot of the National One Goal, some of the charter networks that we do partnership with. Again, we try to have student level data sharing agreements so that we can talk to their counselors and say, okay, here's the cohort of One Goal students that came into NLU, here's how they're doing, here's how they're persisting. When we have that, the FERPA release for that. But if not, we can at least share like cohort level data to say, okay, here's how the group of these students are doing. And again, just kind of back and forth for that. And then employer partners, if you want to.
I think I covered most of the pieces on that, so I'll just open it up, because I know we are past time at this point, to any questions, I guess, for either of the groups that presented.
We're here.